Hi, this is Greg Kesich. I'm the editorial page editor at the Portland Press Herald, and I am here with columnists Bill Nemitz and Cynthia Dill, and we are talking about the Trump administration, which is rolling towards its 100th day anniversary. Rolling. It's flying. It's soaring like the Hindenburg.
I can think of a few other verbs.
So here we are.
Lurching, maybe?
What's your take, Bill? It's been an interesting time, anyway.
It's an artificial benchmark, to be sure, but so much emphasis has been put on it. I think one of the reasons for that is because Trump seems so hell-bent on doing something this week that will kind of cement his first 100 days, and just really hasn't been able to do it. The one high-profile, tangible thing that he's accomplished in his first 100 days is the nomination and appointment or confirmation of Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, in one way or another, everything else has kind of been a disaster. Obamacare's been, although they're trying desperately to do something before Saturday on Obamacare, but that went up in flames. Immigration went up in flames. He's had these couple of military actions in Syria and Afghanistan that are of uncertain impact, long-range impact, other than that they were very dramatic. So I think we're getting pretty much what I certainly expected to see, and that is a lot of kind of chaos, lack of direction, and no real sense even now, 100 days in, as to what this president stands for.
I think it's smoothing out a little bit, though. Like, it was so chaotic when he was first elected, and I sense kind of an easing into the Trump administration. Like, when I was listening to the president the other day talk about the 100 days, and he was saying, it's basically what you just said. It's his artificial benchmark, and he, rattled off a few of what he thought his accomplishments were. And then when he was questioned about, pushing for the repeal and replacement of Obamacare, he basically said, well, if it's not this week, I mean, he seems to hopefully be developing a little bit of a longer term, longer perspective on things. And I do think in talking to Republicans, I mean, they're happy that we bombed, Syria. Very happy. They're happy that that we're having kind of this, finally an armada heading in the right direction towards North Korea, that the cabinet is being made up of kind of these tough guys. So I actually think the 100 days is, for him, the fact that we're still here and
yeah, right.
I
mean, to me, the big questions going in were whether the institutions were strong enough to block him from his crazier stuff.
Right.
And it turns out maybe they are. The courts stopped a lot of the executive orders, particularly the immigration one. Congress has a lot of brakes built into the system that keep it from rolling down the hill.
I personally like that he called out the Freedom Caucus on the ACA. I thought that vote was kind of exciting, and I was glad that Trump pushed them to have a vote and then showed Republicans, okay, this is what it looks like when we...
One thing I would caution, though, is we still, as far as how he's interfaced with the judiciary, it's pretty much so far been all at the appellate level.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when...
A judge on some island on the Pacific.
No, it's been the district court judges who are doing all the
good
stuff.
Well, I mean, it hasn't gotten above the appellate level, is what I mean.
In
other words, we haven't involved the Supreme Court yet.
Right.
And once we start involving the Supreme Court in some of these issues, as we inevitably will, it's going to be very interesting with this court to see how they react to Donald Trump. I mean, the balance hasn't really changed with Gorsuch because he replaced Scalia, so we essentially have the same political balance on the court that Obama did. But I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens when things that have Trump's brand all over them hit the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Because it really hasn't happened yet.
Well, what about the opposition? It's 100 days for the resistance opposition, too. What kind of grade do we give them?
I would say C plus. C plus because there has been some really effective opposition. Obviously, the Women's March is a good example. I think there's been a higher level of civic engagement. A lot of people showing up at things in all kinds of capacities, at meetings, local meetings. The ACLU dinner was sold out. I mean, there's a real activism that's. On the other hand, I think some of the political messages haven't been. There's been no natural coalescing around any political leader, so there hasn't. But that'll take time. But I would say C plus.
Yeah, I think what I find interesting, and this isn't just with the opposition, but it's across the whole political spectrum, and that is just the overall level of engagement of the citizenry. I mean, if there is a silver lining to all of this, it's that a lot more people are paying attention day in and day out to what's going on in our government right now than in recent memory. Now, these people are, might be in two diametrically opposed groups, and we still have a very divided country. But if you start with the premise that civic engagement is a good thing, then I suppose that's one good thing that Donald Trump has accomplished.
Some of it is, and some of it isn't, right? I mean, these sort of anti-fascist groups in the black hoods that are going around, threatening people and
what, you like their free speech?
Right. Yeah, I'm opposed to their free speech. I think So I think I have a little PTSD from living under the LePage administration for so long. But I remember those bumper stickers that said 61%, and I thought that meant that 61% don't like LePage for most of the same reasons that I don't like him, and it turned out no, actually, there's a lot of diversity, and we saw with the Bernie Sanders Unity rally in Portland, where half the Unity rally was booing the other half. There's some problems baked into the opposition that I haven't really seen any leadership that could bridge.
I think Cynthia's right. I think that's going to take some time. We've yet to see anybody emerge, particularly on the Democratic side, who I think is going to kind of take that mantle and run with it. I think Bernie and Tom Perez are doing their damnedest to work it out. But you're right, every time they appear in public, you get this kind of embarrassing display.
It is embarrassing.
The split that still
There's
exists.
an embarrassing element in both, I think, political parties that thinks it's somehow effective to be, obnoxious and violent and stupid at things. I mean, that's really, in my view, what's on display. I mean, the whole ugliness of this is that, the campaign was ugly, the presidency is kind of ugly, the resistance is kind of ugly, but in a way, I think I'm hoping it's cathartic in the long run. I mean, we really are seeing the gross things come out in society, like the white supremacists marching, and trying to validate themselves and all this crap. But hopefully it'll also be a reawakening of people's, civil rights and, remembering why we have the two-party system and how there can be intellectual debates that lead to something, not just this fighting. But the Democrats here in Maine are particularly challenged because, in my view, there is an element of the Bernie camp that is not really Democrat. They're not really Democrats. They're just angry, newly engaged people who fell in love with Bernie, like the personality cult. And that's just hard to shake.
Not unlike the Tea Party was to the Republicans 6-7 years ago, where they weren't really good old school traditional Republicans, but they took over the party.
Right.
So
it became part of the institution, and the white shoe Republicans decided to go along with them.
Right.
But it seemed to me there was some policy issues that were there was the libertarian Republicans that were the new, versus the old school, whereas in the Democrats, it's hard to find a lot of policy differences. It's not like the Bernie people are saying, we want to, increase the minimum wage, and the Hillary people are saying, no, we don't. It's not.
Right, exactly.
It's not policy.
It's something else. It's something more of a, there's this question of people say they want a fighter, and Bernie is a fighter, and you can't have a fighter unless you say what you're against. And that's I think difficult for the
Fighter, give me a break.
For people who want to bring people together, right? You know, people say I'm going to bring everybody together. Well, maybe people don't want to be brought together.
Right, and who?
But anyway, speaking of not
Republican
being together, leadership in the legislature in Augusta has come out strongly against the 3% surcharge that was approved by the voters, narrowly approved by the voters last fall. And the Democrats have come out equally strongly for increasing education spending to 55%. And they've both drawn lines in the sand, but they're not exactly the same line. You know, they're not standing on either side of the same line. So what's going to happen? Is there a way for both of them to walk away and say that they won?
We'll see on June 29th, won't we?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think it's really going to come down to one of those, standoffs that's going to take us perilously close to the end of the fiscal year, because, this is all tied into the budget. I think there will be a compromise here. I think there has to be. Anytime you have both sides saying that this is our drop-dead position, and those two positions are 180 degrees apart, then obviously the answer is going to lie somewhere in the middle. I don't think the governor is helping matters by going around the state as he did in Fort Kent on Monday and just spewing out these blatant falsehoods about the surcharge, in which he said at the town meeting that it applies to, if you're over the $200,000 threshold, it applies to all 200,000 rather than just the amount over 200,000. And I mean, I know not everybody understands marginal tax rates, but good God, you would hope the governor would.
He's supposed to.
Yeah. And
he does have an MBA, so you got to wonder, does he really not understand it?
He does, I think. I think that this was just a way of getting people riled up. Just like when he says he earlier in the day, he released hundreds of letters to the press from people who had already left Maine because of this tax surcharge, when in fact what his administration released were 37 letters and emails, half of which weren't even addressed to him. They were recycled legislative testimony. And not one of them, there were a few in there from people saying, gosh darn it, I'm going to leave. But none of them, as he claimed, were from people who had actually left Maine. So there's this, you can call it hyperbole, you can call it flat out
BS.
Falsehood. But the fact is that he's not, as I wrote this morning, this is a good debate to be had, because it gets to the heart of this question of is the citizen initiative the best way to make tax policy? And I think it's a very legitimate question, and it's something that clearly has to be hashed out by the Republicans and the Democrats in Augusta. For him to come in and start throwing these red herrings into that serves no one, and only further alienates both sides.
He does it with every issue. So this is where the unsung heroes in the legislature come out, because obviously the Appropriations Committee is where the budget is initially negotiated. The House Republicans are going to vote against it, so that means the Senate and they're going to have to reach a compromise that can sustain a veto, or override a veto. And so I suspect that's what's going to happen.
Which they have to do anyway, right? Because it's of the calendar, it says that they have to pass a 2/3 budget.
Are we there yet?
I believe so. Right?
Yeah.
I guess we certainly are.
past it.
I think it's 1st of April.
They would have had to do it back in March.
Okay, so that's what's going to happen, and whether the governor vetoes it and the House ours, and
so it's the same formula.
He already is saying that that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and everybody knows that's what's going to happen. That's what's happened every single year since he's been in office.
And they will work it out. Yeah. There's no question in my mind. They will work it out. What question 2, the education referendum, will look like at the end of this session, I think is still open to quite a bit of speculation.
Well, and I think most people are going to be okay with that, though, because it is so arbitrary. 55%. What's magic about 55%? Nothing. 3%. What's magic about that? Nothing. I mean, both sides want more, education funding, and it's a,
I would just differ, though, on the 55%, in that it's been enshrined in statute for 13 years now.
I know, but there's
and
no
the state
evidence.
has failed to reach it. So it's a promise that's been broken and broken and broken and broken.
Talk to the cities that don't get revenue sharing.
The 3% really came out of thin air. I mean, why 3? I was talking to someone today who said, when you consider that this affects roughly about 16,000 taxpayers in Maine.
Yeah.
Now, for the other 700 and odd thousand who voted on this and knew that this tax increase would not impact them, you could have made it, instead of 3, you could have made it 6, 7, heck, you could have made it 10.
Right.
And they would have voted for it because it doesn't affect
55%,
them.
you know, when the budget is passed, it is a law. So to the extent that the budget is passed and it changes the law that says it's 55%, that's just the way it is, and that's the way we've been doing it. And my point is just that if there was, in fact, 55%, that's 55% of what? Does it include retirement? Does it not include retirement? Does it include, you know, so it's not a magic number that's going to educate Maine's kids and, you know, increase the workforce and, you know, our average income is going to go up significantly.
No, the history of it, though, is it came out of a series of referenda on tax reform, local tax reform, and people feeling that they were paying too much property tax. And this was pushed by MMA and the school. And the idea was that this would, you have the broad-based taxes covering more of the school budget. And then under the LePage administration, he's been saying that the school formula is all wrong, and the money's going to the wrong places, and it's not worth putting more money into it. So they brought in a study. They did a study of the formula, and a national group looked at it and determined that the formula is just fine. The only problem is that there's no money in it.
Exactly.
And the 150 million is the amount that they need to get there. And that's how they came up with the 3% and the 200,000. And you know, in Maine, to me, somebody who makes over $200,000 is rich. This is not the 1% of Americans that we keep hearing about, the billionaire class. You know, people who through their small business or medium-sized business are clearing $200,000 a year. May seem rich in this context, but
I would rather make decisions about education funding in the normal course. Have legislators who have been elected hammer out a deal in the appropriation process and have a budget. I mean, to do the budget by referendum, it's just hard, and it just complicates things. And so I think that my view is sort of like the Bible. I mean, you don't take it literally. It's a message, you know? So the message is we need to increase funding in education, and the amount has to be agreed upon by 2/3 of the legislature.
But that constituency, and I think it's important to note because it's been reflected certainly in some of the comments that the governor did release and in some of the emails I've received since, is that by definition, as a state like Maine ages, the constituency for the schools shrinks.
Yeah.
And I am losing count of the number of people who directly to me or secondhand I've heard say, why should I be so concerned about educational funding? It's been 20 years since I had a kid in the schools. Now, you can try to explain the greater social...
you know, why should I have to pay for
my
mammogram?
And you can try to explain the greater social good to them.
Right.
But the fact is, especially for a lot of people who are living hand to mouth, it's becoming increasingly harder to get them to think about the commonwealth, the common good.
Oh, yeah.
And they're much more interested in their own finances. So going forward, as long as the median age in Maine continues to creep up, I think this is going to become a bigger and bigger challenge for the educational system.
Unless old people don't understand the reality that unless you have an educated workforce, you don't have an economy. And so it has to be an education of the older people. You know what I mean? Of course you have to invest in education if you want a sustainable economy.
It's probably not so much that they don't understand, it's that people on fixed budgets don't like to see their property tax go up.
Well, they're the ones that go out and vote for the 55% and the 3%. It's not the people who don't want it, it's the legislators who are refusing to do it. You know what I mean?
Yes, but there's, as you said, it's really complicated that when you're in the legislature, you're balancing multiple factors and not just, do I think there should be more money for schools? Of course you do. So let's leave the State House for now and look at the big world where we're having a lot of activity around foreign policy in Washington, and the implications are felt all over the world, including South Korea, where Bill, you were telling me that you have some family.
Well, yeah, my daughter-in-law is from Seoul. She came to this country quite a number of years ago, but her parents are still there. We've been over visiting them in the recent past few years, and got a very close-up look at pretty much all of South Korea. But what struck me in touring the country, and what strikes me now in knowing precisely where our in-laws live, is how close. They live closer to North Korea than we are to Augusta.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, just to put it in perspective.
Is there a wall?
There is.
Is there a wall? Did Mexico pay for it?
Well, there's a DMZ
Everybody.
where I would not dare set foot.
We've all been paying
you know,
for it for
right. But
70
the
years.
point is that if there were any kind of provocation, and I'm not talking about even a nuclear conflict necessarily. I'm just talking about something that would prompt Kim Jong-un to, launch conventional weapons. It's literally in their backyard. So I don't think most Americans realize just how perilous the situation is right there, especially with tensions as high as they are right now. And I was talking to my daughter-in-law just over the weekend and asked her, are you thinking about this? Do you worry about it? She goes, of course I do.
Oh, yeah.
It's a city of
Her
20
parents
million
are there.
people.
Yeah,
And
they are packed in. It's like nothing. It's like nothing I'd ever seen. The density of people in that area, and again the proximity to Pyongyang. It's frightening, and this could go from, an area of concern to an absolute global crisis in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think it's the most important issue pressing the world's community. I mean, the president obviously has taken it seriously enough to have all 100 senators to the White House for a briefing. But more interestingly, I think, is just this, there's been such detailed reporting on the military capacity, and the generals talking about, this missile could reach this, I just feel like I know more about North Korea and the military threats that it presents, and the alliances with China and Russia, and the dance that Trump has done, first with Putin, now with China, it's just been fascinating to me. And what'll be interesting, I think, is to see if, Trump obviously has failed in his deal making on so many things. I mean, ACA, all these things, he's failed. But, he's trying to, tease China with, we'll give you a great trade deal if you, stick it to North Korea.
Put a
if he
leash
can
on
pull
that
that
dog.
off,
Pressure on
that's
that.
like,
Yeah, I mean,
that's so interesting, I think.
sort of the most reassuring thing about Trump the first 100 days has been to the extent which he leaves foreign policy, the mechanics of foreign policy, to his very conventional team of generals.
Yeah, I have a lot more confidence in Secretary Mattis than I do in President Trump. If it came down to making the tough call.
Rex
South
Tillerson,
Korea.
he's I'm
He's a globalist,
But-
I keep hearing.
Right. But
yes, he is.
But that,
well, when you're the Secretary of
And
State,
if you want to
it's
have
hard
to
not
actually,
to
if
be.
you want to live on the globe, it's
Right.
nice to have some globalists.
but that
in
said,
charge.
what hasn't changed is this, all the bellicose rhetoric and threats coming out of North Korea. That's been going on forever. That's been
Right.
going on under his father before the current leader took over. But what has changed, and I think what we need as a country need to be aware of, is their capability
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
has changed.
Yes.
And it's changing rapidly, to the point where just yesterday I heard one of the, I forget which one of the generals in the administration said it's not outside the realm of possibility right now that they could hit Hawaii with an ICBM.
Yeah.
And so, when you start talking about that,
know.
and you start looking at this kooky kid,
But then
watching it, who fires missiles like he's in his backyard shooting
Hanging out
off
with Dennis
skyrockets.
Rodman.
But then I get worried that it's like, the news, it's so sensationalized that I start to worry. Like, so is this even real? I mean, these all of a sudden, like, there's all these analysts now who are talking about like military strategy, and they're trying to get their things on cable news, and it's all of a sudden like a cottage industry.
I think though you discounted at your own peril. That's the problem. I mean, they had that
yeah.
parade, and they were even saying when they had the big parade the other day with all the missiles, and one of the reporters is saying, of course, there's no way of knowing whether there's actually something inside these missiles, but you have to assume there is.
Well, we do know that they're the only country to test a nuclear weapon since 2000. In the world, and they've tested a number of them successfully. So
I think there have been 5 so far.
And their missile, they have kind of varying degrees of success with their missile launches, but they are pursuing missile capabilities.
Well, if Trump takes out North Korea, that could be his moment.
How could you possibly take out North Korea? I mean, I think you'd end up taking a lot of the world with you.
Right,
hey, George Bush, mission accomplished.
I mean, China cannot and will not just sit by.
China, the world's second biggest economy.
It's not North Korea that you worry about. It's China.
Yeah. Well,
really.
Yeah.
Well, as frustrated as they may be with the North Koreans.
Yeah, I'm not as worried about with China at all. I mean, obviously China is a huge power that has interests.
Try invading North Korea.
No, but I mean, China. Obama was able to negotiate a pretty high-level deal with China on climate. So there's hope, I think, for China to be a world partner.
So you were saying earlier that you were talking to people that were happy about the bombing of the missile strikes in Syria. Mm-hmm. What are they happy about?
Specifically, I was talking with Lance Dutson on WGA and Inside Maine. We do kind of a roundabout about current events, and he was saying that, as a Republican, he felt good about the fact that American leadership was strong and that we were showing the world that we were, going to take a stand, and it's about time that we did something about Syria. And then, of course, there had to, I recall, perhaps a reference to Obama, drawing the red line and then backing away from it. And according to Lance, he's not alone in that feeling. I've definitely had several conversations with people in my office who are Republicans, and they're quite pleased with. And frankly, I wasn't opposed necessarily to, dropping a big bomb on a bunch of jerks who are gassing kids, and I'm conflicted, like a lot of people, about the appropriate degree to which we should be, addressing violence with violence and possibly risking a greater war. It's a tricky situation, but a lot of Republicans are glad.
They're killing kids every day. The same people are killing the same kids in the same town as the ones that got gassed, and we don't do anything. And when you look at our options of what we could do, there really aren't any. There's no faction in there that's really somebody that you want to align yourself with. Maybe the Kurds, but
that's where I looked at that, and I think the reason he launched the missile strike on Syria by his President Trump's own admission was the images he saw on TV.
TV, great.
The baby.
Which
the beautiful
were
baby.
Heart-wrenching, to be sure. My question is, when you take an action like that, to what extent have you actually destroyed or degraded the enemy's capability to do these things again? Now, the best estimate I've heard is that strike may have destroyed or damaged 20% of the Syrian Air Force. In other words, their planes. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. It was a very symbolically, it was a very big message, but strategically, I'm just not sure what it accomplished. Similarly with Afghanistan, when we dropped the mother of all bombs on northeastern Afghanistan, what did it do? Other than make a big bang, we don't know. And I think these things have to be carefully considered in terms of.
I hope so.
What
I'm sure they'll tell us that it was the biggest, number 2 guy in Al Qaeda.
We do have this huge military budget, and I don't blame them.
I just get really skeptical with things that go boom.
Oh,
and the shock and awe kind of thing, where wow, did you see that? But really, what did it accomplish? We've been down that road.
We got to stop talking about the Russia investigation.
That's true.
That was
I guess we have to stop talking altogether, according to Molly.
Quickly, anybody have an opinion about us changing our time zone?
I have long been an advocate for us going to the Atlantic time zone, so I will support the legislation in Augusta right now.
How does that work?
wholeheartedly.
We don't change
Hey.
for...
Well, that's another decision, but what we would do right now would be
That's another podcast.
yes, let's do that.
Oh, I think we
Yeah.
can't do it. Okay.
Let's
No.
study up
Come
on
back,
that.
folks.
Yeah,
Next
that's
week
the
we are
tease.
really
Next-
going to read
Yeah.
the bill, and
We'll meet
more
next
to
week
say
at
about
3:30, or is it 4:30?
4:30, depending on you. Okay, well, that's it for today. Thanks for listening, and we'll tune in next week.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast. Make sure you never miss a podcast episode by subscribing on iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. For more of our podcasts, visit pressherald.com/podcasts. Follow the link there to this episode to leave a comment. You can also leave a comment on our Facebook page. I'm Chad Gilley. Once again, thank you for listening to the Portland Press Herald podcast.